Good evening. 2020 hasn't been much of a year for traveling, but if you happen to cross from New Hampshire into Maine, you'll see the iconic Welcome to Maine sign, which now includes the phrase Welcome Home. But today I want to focus less on the words and more on the space between those words, the space that connects their respective meanings, the space and spaces we call home, not physical homes, but the idea of home and how we build it and fill it and share it with others. And to help understand where I'm coming from, I'd like to share a little bit about my story. What does home mean for the immigrant, the refugee, the asylum seeker? Like so many families that have come to these shores over the centuries, my family has had to wrestle with this question. My mother especially struggled with this question. She spent a good portion of her early childhood and adolescence running from the Khmer Rouge and living in a refugee camp in Thailand. When she came to the United States with my grandmother and gave birth to me in a California hospital, imagine the questions she faced. Someone who had no stable definition of home was now to provide a home to a child. And from that day to the day we were put in foster care here in Maine, she struggled being at home and providing a home for her children. My early childhood years were spent mostly with my godparents and my grandmother, who welcomed me as if I was their own son into their family. They had 2 daughters, and to this day, they still consider me their only son. One day, when I was 4 or so years old, my godfather sat me down and said that they were moving to Texas. But rather than taking me along with him, he gave me a choice. Do you want to stay with your mom, or do you want to go with us? I chose to stay with my mom. Whichever choice I made would have been a painful one. But no matter what, no matter how often I was shuttled back and forth between her and my god family and my grandmother, she was still my mother. Do you want to go with us? When I was 5 years old, my mother and my sister Tanya and I followed my grandmother and aunts and uncles across the country to Portland, Maine. Home, the idea of it was a lot different for me back then. My first language was Cambodian. The foods I ate were my Cambodian grandmother and mother's food. The religion I observed was that of my Cambodian parents and grandparents and ancestors. How I created and filled the space of home and what it meant to be welcomed there stood on the shoulders of the culture that my biological family passed down to me. But this all came crashing down. Things got worse for my mom as she continued to struggle to the point where the state intervened. In 1999, me and my sister Tanya were given black trash bags. We were asked to fill the space with our precious items and belongings. We arrived at our first foster home in Acton, our eyes red and bloated from all the crying. On the way there, now started to brim with tears again as we shuffled onto the front deck, then quickly into our new rooms as we started to sob again, forced to sleep in a stranger's home. We were introduced to new foods, new routines, and the concept of chores and allowance. Overnight, we were introduced to a new religion, Christianity. I learned, what a handshake was, and my foster father taught me the message a firm handshake sent. The space around me was new and strange, and it shook the foundations of the space that I had created and called home up until that point. Surrounded by whiteness, I began to push my Cambodian identity away. To survive, I thought, I needed to become like the snow. I needed to become whiter, but I couldn't because my skin was brown like the earth. As the year went on, the strange space we were brought to began to fill with smiles, laughter, shouting matches, timeouts, memories. The very white elementary school that my sister and I attended organized a school-wide Cambodian New Year's celebration, and I came home that day, home to my foster parents, proud to be Cambodian. I began to reconcile my identity as Cambodian and as American, as a son of refugees, and as a foster son. But that fragile peace was disrupted when we were forced to move to a group home, then another foster home. The physical spaces around me changed so many times that my internal space, my identity, my idea of home was in disarray. In 2003, my sister and I were reunited with our two younger siblings, and 2 years later, adopted into one family in 2005. Our adopted family were devout Christians, and we went to church every Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday evening. It was a lot of church. Church was our home. But even though I considered my family in these spaces home, there was a struggle unfolding in the space inside of me. As adolescence dawned on me and my body began to grow and fill more space, a piece of me, a part of my identity, was trying to blossom, to push out of the dark space where I hid it under a bushel. I was gay, but I didn't want to be, because I knew I couldn't be. I knew that this would not be welcome news to the world around me. The people who I looked up to and tried to please were clear, in their own minds at least, that being gay was a sin. It was an abomination. It was against the natural order that God had ordained. I struggled with this cognitive dissonance throughout middle school and high school, of wanting to make my adopted family proud and being the best Christian I could be, but also hiding my being gay. It wasn't until a cold winter night while I was attending Valley Forge Christian College, what I call my winter at Valley Forge, that I decided to be true to myself. When I came home that summer, I started the long journey of coming out to my friends and family. I started to feel and create the space in me and around me with my authentic self, my Cambodian self, my gay self, and it led to me being a community leader and president of the Cambodian Community Association. So I close by saying, home is a space you create and fill over time with memories and cherished moments. Home is a space inside of you, not just around you. Home is a space between you and someone else and everyone else. Home, in a sense, is where there's no boundary between where you are and who you are. Thank you.